We have a massive episode today as we are finishing out the first season of our Bucks Association mode, and quite frankly that's why it took so long to put this episode out. But we are getting to the much needed off season, and this team has been surprising us so far. We are somehow still in playoff contention this year, and we're wondering if we make the playoffs and build around this current roster, or do we still blow up the team at the trade deadline and go full-blown rebuild mode? We'll have to find out, as it all depends on how we finish out the season in this episode. We are starting the month of January at 14-16, and we're holding on to the 8th seed in the East right now. But don't let that record and conference placement fool you, because we were actually contending. We were only 2 games out of the division lead for the Central Division, and other than the top 2 seeds in the Eastern Conference in the Orlando Magic and Miami Heat, seeds 3 through 8 were all pretty close right now, and the competition for them was only going to heat up as we got closer to the playoffs. That begs the question though, what are we going to do at the trade deadline if we still find ourselves in playoff contention? If we are hovering right around the cusp of making or missing the playoffs, I definitely think we still blow this team up, but if somehow this team keeps winning games and playing like they are tonight against the Dallas Mavericks, we could find ourselves in a higher seed in the playoffs for the Eastern Conference, and it would be tough to justify blowing that team up. I think we would get a good test of how this team really stacks up this game, as we would be taking on the 2nd seeded Miami Heat, and the only issue I foresee if we do keep finding success this year and winning more games is how we will actually build around this team. As we've gone over before, we have absolutely no salary room to even offer other players to come and play for us, and that was part of the reason for wanting to blow up this roster, was so we could dump the unsavory contracts. But I feel like we would run the risk of turning the fan base against us if we do find ourselves in contention in the next month and a half, so we'll just have to wait and see what our team is looking like once we reach the trade deadline at the end of February. And if we keep playing and competing like we are against one of the top teams in the league in the Miami Heat tonight, there's a legitimate chance I change my mind and we don't end up blowing up this team and try for a deep playoff push in our first season. While I don't think that is realistic for us, I do think there's a slight probability of that happening, as this team was definitely a lot worse on paper when we took over as their GM than they have actually showed us on the court so far. And I'm definitely not going to complain about it, because we know we have a great starting point to build around regardless of whatever happens for us at the deadline. Now, unfortunately, I do not think we're going to manage to pull off the win here tonight, as Mario Chalmers would end up knocking down both of his free throws, and despite a last-second 3 from Carlos Delfino off the inbounds pass to make it a 1-point game, we would end up dropping this one to Miami, but at least kept it very competitive. We're jumping ahead now to the last week of January, and we only have 4 games left this month. The Bucks are currently sitting at 20-23 and are 3 games back from a 500 record, and the Cavaliers are starting to pull away with the division a bit more too than they did at the start of the month, as we are currently tied for 3rd place right now in the Central Division and are 5 games back from Cleveland. We are also just still barely holding on to that final 8th seed in the Eastern Conference right now as well, as this team just can't seem to break the 500 mark no matter what, but a win tonight would push us in that direction. This team has been heating up near the end of January, as we are currently 7-3 in our last 10 games on our schedule, and a win here against Atlanta tonight would make it 8-2 and only 2 games back from a 500 record. With only 3 games left this month after tonight's game, we have a chance to win out and finally have a winning record headed into the month of February, and it looks like that will be a real possibility with a win here tonight, as we are absolutely manhandling the Atlanta Hawks here at home. The next 3 games to close out this month will be against mediocre teams in the Raptors, Nets, and the Clippers, all 3 of which are sitting near the bottom of the respective conferences, and in my opinion are worse teams than ours. So I think the goal of having a winning record headed into February is a legitimate possibility for this team. After picking wins up against both the Raptors and the Nets, we were now 1 win away from having a winning record with this game against the Clippers, and the last time this team had a winning record was the very first week of the season this year. But things weren't looking good for us early on, as the Clippers were firing on all cylinders to start this game, and we were trying our best to keep up with them throughout the first quarter. Despite that, they still had a solid lead over us throughout the entire first half and headed into the locker rooms as well, and it was taking a lot longer than I would have liked, but we were slowly fighting our way back into this game throughout the 3rd quarter, and then finally we would take our first lead of the night here in the 4th quarter, and once we took the lead, we would never give it back to the Clippers tonight, as our team was determined to finally have a winning record as we geared up for this last stretch of the regular season. Our team just seemed to want this win more tonight than the Clippers did, and we would hold them off by 3 points for the win, as that would give us a 24-23 record headed into February, and we now had climbed up to the 6th seed in the East with only 3 weeks left until the trade deadline. We were starting the month of February with a road trip to take on the Phoenix Suns, and this is who we traded Corey Maggette to back in the month of December, so we had a former player on this squad looking to get revenge on us tonight, and we definitely didn't want that to happen, because we didn't want to lose the winning record we had just achieved, and we didn't want to look like fools for trading away a player that had actually been really solid for us so far this year. Maggette Maggette was actually a top 3 scorer for us on our team next to Andrew Bogut and Brandon Jennings before we traded him, but once again it came down to his contract and we just couldn't afford to build the team we wanted with a player of his age and contract that he had still on the roster. But his trade to the Phoenix Suns seemed to be a win-win for both teams so far, as we dumped his salary and the Suns got a veteran who's great at still scoring. As great as Corey Maggette could be, he didn't seem to be much help at all though for the Phoenix Suns tonight against his former team, as we were destroying them tonight on their home court and the 3-ball was just raining from us all night long. This team was starting to get hot at the right time of the season and was really building some chemistry together, it seemed, but little did they know though that at the end of this week that was all about to change and the team was going to look different. 3 games in 1 week into February, we were sitting at 26-24 but wanted a head start on the trade deadline. The name of the game was dumping salaries, and John Salmons was the first to go with his 4-year $32 million contract, as we would send him to the Rockets for their first round pick this year and Jared Jeffries, who was on an expiring deal. Next up was Drew Gooden and his 5-year $32 million contract, and we would trade him straight up for Kyle Korver, whose $15 million over 3 years was much more manageable than 32 over 5. We still had negative $6.5 million in cap space, but over half the team was on 1-year expiring contracts this year now, and then I made the trade that will either be a genius move on my part or could blow up horribly, as we would send Chris Douglas Roberts, the Suns 2012 pick from the Corey Maggette deal, and the Rockets first round pick this year that we just acquired for Sonny Weems and the Raptors first round pick this year. The Raptors are currently second to last place in the East right now, and this could turn into a high lottery pick, so I'm hoping they keep on losing this year. After all those moves, this is what our new rotation will look like for the rest of the season, and headed into All-Star Weekend, we were surprisingly in great shape as we now held the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference standings. All-Star Weekend came and went as it was not that close of a matchup. The West All-Stars would end up defeating the East All-Stars by 10 points, and then just like that, it was time to go back to work for the Bucks. We wanted to close out February on a strong note and clinch a high playoff seed in the East, and there was a real possibility of that as we had a pretty weak schedule the rest of the month, but that didn't mean we could take our foot off the gas and think anything less of any of our upcoming opponents, because as you can see, Minnesota was staying in this game and keeping it close throughout the first half already. We definitely needed to make some changes in the locker room and come out stronger in the second half of this game, and that is exactly what we would do as we get better ball movement and shot selections throughout the third quarter on offense, and we would manage to pull away to a double-digit lead over Minnesota headed into the fourth quarter. The shots would keep falling our way the entire fourth quarter as we extended our lead over the Timberwolves, and what started out as a close game throughout 2.5 quarters of play tonight ended up being a blowout win at home for your Milwaukee Bucks. We would take on one last road trip to New York City to end the month of February for us, and this one wasn't even close as we would walk away with another win here over the Knicks this time, and somehow with this lineup of mostly unwanted role players on our team, we were only 6 games back from being the top seed in the Eastern Conference. Unfortunately, Toronto also seemed to gain some momentum and might not even be a lottery team if they keep it up, and with a month and a half left of the season, hopefully they keep losing and we keep winning. The few remaining matchups we had against Toronto this season were going to be crucial for us to win, because if we wanted their pick to be a lottery pick this draft, we needed to add as many losses as we could to the record, and I'll be honest, it was not looking too promising that we would do that tonight to start this game off. By one point in the night, we went down by as much as 13 points to the Raptors and were being embarrassed. We had a huge fourth quarter though as we fought back, and Jennings would make it only a 1-point lead for Toronto, and then Michael Redd would come up with the clutchest shot of the entire year for the team to give us the lead, as Toronto would not be able to answer, and we would complete the huge comeback against Toronto tonight, as that win and a few more would end our season with a 44-38 record, where we would end up as the 5 seed in the playoffs and where we will pick it up next episode.